So for my video podcast this week, I'm going to be touching on two of the different resources in this week's reading, specifically the Age of AIDS movie part 2, as well as AIDS activism and the rejuvenation of the public sphere by Valeria Fabch and Matthew J. Subnosky. My ideas in this podcast will surround kind of the intersection of these two pieces, as well as the overarching theme of the movement of the AIDS epidemic from the private sphere into the public sphere. To start my discussion, I'm going to share a quote from the AIDS activism text on page 165. It goes, "AIDS is often addressed as a personal issue. As individuals debate, for example, the morality of sexual practices through which a disease is transmitted, or as potential sex partners negotiate a difficult train of safer sex, or as people infected with HIV or AIDS decide whether and how to remain sexually active." Now, I think this really speaks to how privatized the information about AIDS was. It was talking about sex, which was not really talked about, especially in the public sphere, and it was talking about something that was thought of as the gay disease. So people thought that only, people within the LGBTQ plus community could get AIDS, when it wasn't just the LGBTQ plus community, it was everyone could get AIDS. And so it really showed how people really wanted it privatized at first, and then you start to see it move to the public sphere as it becomes a larger epidemic within North America. So another quote that kind of shows this is on page 167, just following. It says, "Obviously, an issue need not affect each member of the community as an individual to be argued as a public issue. Rather, an issue is public because it demands the attention of the community at large." And I think that's exactly what the AIDS epidemic did. It didn't affect every single individual, but it affected the community at large. And there was a lot of panic surrounding this. And I think you could see that in the film. And even in the text, the confusion of they don't have a medicine for this. They don't know what they're doing. It's still new. They're still figuring out. And for me, that's what makes it need to be public. And in a lot of ways need to be political, because it's something that needs to be addressed overall. And in the film in specific, they really discussed how looking at AIDS and the HIV epidemic through a political lens really benefited it. So first they looked at Nelson Mandela, who, took a step back and assigned other people to talk about the AIDS issue in Africa. But then 8 years before Mandela's reign in Uganda, there was African President Yoweri Museveni who ran a whole prevention campaign about it. He talked about AIDS and HIV and the outbreak and how it happened, and really made it a public and political issue and something that could be discussed and would be discussed. And this allowed Uganda to be one of the first African countries to bring AIDS under control. So this shows how the movement of an epidemic like AIDS from the private sphere to the public sphere can really benefit a community, and specifically when it is through a political means, somewhere that has a wide audience and has the ability to discuss factual-based evidence and ways to, permit and stop the spreading of AIDS and HIV in a larger space. Now, another thing that I quickly want to touch on before closing is just making medical jargon and, the new discoveries with AIDS something public. So people who were working with those with AIDS or who had AIDS were the ones that had to kind of translate this medical jargon. And I think that wasn't their job. That should have been the job of people in political power, such as Bill Clinton, to discuss what were the treatments, what did all this medical jargon mean, and how it affects the people. To close off, I would like to say, I think both pieces show the movement of, AIDS and HIV as a topic from the private sphere to the public sphere, both in North America and Africa. But I think where it falls short is the movement of epidemics like AIDS from the private sphere to the public sphere globally, and talking about it not only as singular, localities, but as nations working together to fight this, and as a world who is undergoing these epidemics, and kind of share that information and learn from each other, because I think there is a lot to learn from people who are going through the same issues.